Welcome back. Inserting contents into a scroll view. We'll cover the why we would want to do this, and we will see how we can handle dealing with the keyboard to be able to scroll our view. First, let's take a look at why we might want to embed our view inside of a scroll view. If we take a look at the simulator, and we have our cursor here and enter a title, the keyboard overlaps our add a tag and save button. You can also see that we are not able to scroll to be able to get to the add a tag or save button. So let's go to our create an entry storyboard, and we will see how we can embed everything inside of a scroll view. So we can select everything. We can go to editor, embed in, and there's a scroll view option. So let's select that, and that puts everything inside of a scroll view. But notice our scroll view just has these objects. Normally when working with a scroll view, you want to embed it in a view itself and name that view a content view. So let's select all of our objects again, go to editor, embed in, and embed that into a view, and we will name that content view. That part's not required, but the content view will give the scroll view its size on how large the content of that view is, and then we can adjust the scroll view to be a smaller size, and then it will just scroll the remainder of the size that is taken up by the content view. So if the content view is bigger than the scroll view, then the scroll view will scroll. Notice we're getting this error here, and this is because we don't have any constraints set to our views. We will go over that in another section. But for now, we can go to our create entry, and we can start implementing some functionality to be able to handle when the keyboard is shown. The first thing we want to do is create an IB outlet for our scroll view. So we say at IB outlet, a weak var, and we will just call this scroll view, and it's going to be a UI scroll view. Before we forget, we can go ahead and hook that up. So we can go to create entry.storyboard, right click this view controller, select our scroll view, and assign it to the scroll view. And make sure that scroll view is attached to scroll view inside of our relationship editor. We can exit that. One thing we want to do to be able to handle our keyboard is to create a new group, and we'll call this helpers. We can drag that down below our UI. And then inside that helpers folder, we will want to create a Swift file, and we will call this keyboard scrollable. And keyboard scrollable is going to be a protocol that gives us functionality to whatever is going to conform to this protocol. So we will say protocol keyboard scrollable. And the keyboard scrollable is going to have a scroll view, which will be a UI scroll view. To be able to do that, we have to import UIKit. And this is going to be a get-only property. It's not something that's going to be set by us. It's going to be set because it's going to have a connection from the storyboard. We also want to have two methods, and those methods will be keyboard did show, that takes in a notification, and a keyboard will hide, and this will also take in a notification. Next, we want to extend our keyboard scrollable protocol. And by extending the keyboard scrollable, we are able to implement some default functionality that anything that conforms to this protocol will automatically gain access to without us having to implement it ourselves when conforming to that protocol. So we want to make sure that the class or struct that is conforming to this protocol is a UI view controller. So in this case, it will definitely have to be a class. A struct will not be able to conform to this because a struct will never be able to be a UI view controller. And here we want to implement a method that's going to be called register for keyboard notifications. Every time a keyboard is shown or hidden, a notification is sent to Notification Center, which is a global state that the app has. So whenever the keyboard is shown, this UI keyboard did show will fire and notify all the views in your app that this is fired, and we can respond based off of this notification. So we will say notification center .default.addObserver, because we're going to observe for the keyboard did show, and we're also going to observe for the keyboard will hide. So we will say self, the selector will be $selector or $selector. And we are going to call our keyboard did show, and the name of the notification that we want to subscribe to is UI keyboard did show, and the object will be nil. And we want to do the same thing to subscribe to the keyboard will hide. Observer will be self, so whoever conforms to this protocol will be the observer, and this is actually the wrong initializer method, because we didn't call default. We want to access the default notification center, and then add the observer with the notification name. So again, observer will still be self. Selector is the method that we want to call when this notification is observed, and in this case we want to do the keyboard will hide. And these two methods that we're calling here and here are up in our keyboard scrollable protocol, which will be implemented by our class that is conforming to this. Next we want to do UI keyboard will hide, and the object will be nil. We can get rid of that extra line there. Now we want to implement two more methods, and they will be keyboard was shown, that takes in a notification, and the other method will be keyboard will be hidden. So these are going to be default methods that whoever conforms to this protocol will have access to. So when we conform to this protocol, the class does not have to override these methods. They can override it to give it more granular functionality, but in this case, for our app, this functionality will be sufficient. So we'll start with the keyboard will be hidden, because it's a lot easier to implement. So we want to get the content insets, and we want to reset them to 0. So the content insets will take UI inset edge insets and set it to 0. And then we will just tell the scroll view and set the content inset equal to the content insets that we just set. And then we want the scroll view scroll indicator insets to equal the content insets. So what's going to happen is when the keyboard is hidden, well, first let's talk about when the keyboard is shown. When the keyboard is shown, we need to take whatever the size of the keyboard is and shrink the actual scroll view by however large the keyboard is. But we don't want to shrink the whole thing. We just want to shrink the content inset, and that will allow it to be able to scroll for the full content size. And then when keyboard will be hidden, that's when it resets itself to 0. So in order to get the actual size of the keyboard, we have to first get this property of notification.userInfo, and that takes this notification here, and the notification that we're looking for is going to be this UI keyboard did show. So now, based off of that info, we can get the keyboard value, and that's going to be equal to a key inside that info, because the info that we get back is going to be a dictionary of keys and values, and the key that we're looking for is going to be the UI keyboard frame begin user info. and we're going to cast that as an NS value, and then we want to grab the scroll view to make sure that a scroll view exists. If any of that is false, we want to return early. And then if all those values are true, we want to grab the keyboard size equal to the keyboard value to a CGRect value, and we want to grab the size of that. If you notice up here we spelled notification wrong, so we can correct that, and that's why the autocomplete wasn't working for us. Now we want to create the content insets, and we're going to do a UI edge insets make. We're going to fill in 0.0, 0.0, and then for the height, keyboard size.height, and then 0.0 for the width. And then we want to set the scroll view content inset equal to the content insets that we just created. Again, spelled wrong. We have to remove that T. And then we want the scroll view.scroll indicator insets to also be set to the content insets. Now to be able to implement this protocol, we can go to our createEntry.swift, and we can create an extension down at the bottom. And we will just create entry, is what we were extending, and we want to conform to the keyboard scrollable protocol. And here we need to fill in our keyboard did show, because we don't have a default implementation for that. And we need to fill in the keyboard will hide. Both of those take in the notifications. And here we just want to call our keyboard was shown and pass in our notification. This will need an N, so we'll have to go back in our keyboard scrollable and put an N for our keyboard was shown. And put an N in there as well. Actually, we don't need an N there because keyboard did show is this method up here. So in the create entry for our keyboard will hide, we just want to call our keyboard will be hidden and pass in the notification. Last thing we need to do is go up and in our view did load, which we don't have yet, but we can override it, is we want to register for those notifications. So we can say register for keyboard notifications. And notice we have two compiler errors. And that's because our functions in our selector, the keyboard did show and keyboard will hide, have to conform to interoperability between Swift and Objective-C. So we just have to say obj-C, obj-C space, and that will get rid of those compiler errors. And that's giving us another error. We probably have to do it to the protocol itself as well. So now those compiler errors go away. This won't actually work yet because we don't have any auto constraints to fill out the size of our scroll view. So if we go back to our storyboard, this little red error here saying that we don't have the size of the content view, this is stopping this from working. But later in the course, when we set those auto constraints, you will see once the keyboard comes up, it will cover this section of the screen, but we can then scroll up to be able to have access to the add tag and save. In this section, we covered a lot of various topics. We set up our project for our application that we're building. We took a look at Xcode. We built a user interface, created a custom view, took a look at Model View Controller and created our model and controller for our entry. We explored actions and outlets. We saw how we could troubleshoot these actions and outlets and generate these actions and outlets. And we also inserted contents into a scroll view to be able to handle the keyboard when it's displayed on the screen. In the next section, we take a look at working with UI table.